We have a major report that reveals the Toronto Raptors are trying to get involved in a blockbuster trade. Yes, Jimmy Butler, we've all seen the trade reports, the proposals, and the Raptors are trying to get in on this, not to acquire Jimmy Butler, but to be a facilitator of one of these big trades. And of course, the Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, they have a lot of contracts to do it. So we'll discuss that, including some injury updates for this Toronto Raptors team, who are currently on a 2-game win streak, been getting some good W's as of late. So these games are back being watchable. And then again, we have a ton of reports to discuss. So lots of stuff to break down in this video. But before we do, folks, again, if you guys are a part of the over 67% of our viewers that haven't hit the subscribe button just yet, make sure you guys hit that sub button so you don't miss a single thing that's going on with this Toronto Raptors team, because with the trade deadline now, 2-3 weeks away, there are bound to be a ton of reports, news, and actual moves to actually go down for this Raptors group. So lots of stuff to dive into in this video, but let's dive into the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is multiple Raptors injury updates. Now, the Raptors have, of course, dealt with a ton of injuries over the course of this year, and even with this team nearing a little pizza party, nearing a 3-game win streak, they are still dealing with a plethora of injuries. So we'll break down basically what the first one's saying is. Coming from Josh Lewenberg, essentially, Ochai Agbaji is questionable for tomorrow's game against the Milwaukee Bucks after requiring 3 stitches in his right hand versus Boston. And Immanuel Quickley remains out, and Jacoby Walter as well as Jonathan Mobo are still on G League assignment. So Ochai Agbaji, again, we saw him go down in yesterday's game. Not sure, again, his stitches in his hand shouldn't be a super long-term injury, but of course, you don't want to open those bad boys up playing basketball. Everyone's like, oh, Sookie, all that type of stuff. You can't play basketball if you have stitches in your hand. You risk them getting knocked out, getting infected, and then just having to re-stitch them up. So that's sort of, an injury that you just got to kind of deal with unless you can find a way around it. And then, of course, Immanuel Quickley is still out with injury, which just sucks to see, because as these players get injured, and we've seen it with Scottie, we've seen it with RJ, we've seen it with players in Raptors past, where fans of the team, and I get it why, but start to turn on players when they start dealing with injuries, when they're out of the lineup. And IQ has just been dealt a very dirty hand this season with the injury cards, and it just sucks, because he's a guy that had high expectations coming in this year, got a massive contract, and still a young guard given his first opportunity to be the main point guard on a team. We just haven't seen him go out there consistently enough and actually play in these games. So sucks to see for Immanuel Quickley being out of the lineup once again, but, that's kind of what's happening there. And then, of course, Jacoby Walter, Jonathan Mobo down with the 905. And we could probably explain why that's happened with the 905 in the next section of this video. Yes, a blockbuster trade in the works for the Toronto Raptors, according to recent reports, recent chatter, recent buzz. So, of course, everyone's seen it. Jimmy Butler's been outspoken. He's been frustrated, he's mad, he wants out of the Miami Heat. No surprise there. And of course, the Raptors have been linked to Jimmy Butler in the past, but now is not the time for the Toronto Raptors to go after Jimmy Butler, given the fact we're in year 1 of a rebuild. This team is trying to capture some flags. Even with the win streak and everything that's going on with the team right now, Jimmy Butler just doesn't make a ton of sense for this team right now in terms of timelines, in terms of fit, in terms of all of the above. But the Raptors getting involved in a Jimmy Butler trade sweepstakes makes a ton of sense, and something we briefly brought up on videos, but essentially we've had an official report come out now that essentially breaks down what's going on with this whole situation. So let's break it down here, because Doug Smith of the Toronto Star said the Raptors aren't driving the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes that's consuming NBA fans who live and die with the speculation that's about to engulf the league ahead of this year's trade deadline, but they'd sure like to have their say in how it all ends. Essentially, let's get the right reports here, but talking to a handful of people around the league, all granted anonymity because none have the ultimate say in how the saga ends, it is obvious the Raptors are hoping to insinuate themselves into the conversation. It's not that they want Butler. His skill set, age, $52 million, player option for next season, along with his longer-term financial desires, make him about as ill-suited as anyone to join this roster. But many believe that without a doubt, General Manager Bobby Webster and President Masai Ujiri are trying to be facilitators and benefactors in what will ultimately be what happens with Jimmy Butler, the disgruntled Heat wing who has asked for a trade, How will they do this? Well, it's increasingly difficult in the NBA landscape to make trades. The Raptors have a range of expiring contracts that could allow them to be a third or even fourth participant in a trade, whether it's Bruce Brown, $23 million contract, whether it's Chris Boucher and his $10 million contract, Davion Mitchell and his $6.4 million contract, all have deals that expire at the end, heading into the summer, and are valued parts of putting together a jigsaw puzzle and a big splash of an NBA trade. So that's a lot of stuff said there from Doug Smith. And of course, we've known the Raptors ended up bringing back Bruce Brown, signed him in the offseason to essentially facilitate trades. That's what Adrian Wojnarowski said in his report when Bruce Brown ended up signing with the squad. He's a vet. He's a valuable piece, to different playoff teams. And he's on a contract that's very, very useful in trying to match trades, especially for a guy like Jimmy Butler. So, we know that the Raptors kind of have designed this roster to get involved in one of these big trades, and Jimmy Butler is the main guy that's been brought up in these big trade sweepstakes. So the Raptors getting involved, trying to make one of these moves, trying to get one of these things done, just makes a ton of sense for this squad. And, looking at the roster, looking at who we have, I brought this image up a couple times, but Bruce Brown, of course, his stats haven't been phenomenal, but looking at recent games from the actual eye test, watching actually the product on the court, Bruce Brown has been moving a little bit better. Defensively, he's putting a little bit more on-ball pressure, and we know from his experience winning an NBA championship with the Denver Nuggets, long time being an effective role player for the Brooklyn Nets, Indiana Pacers, these squads. Bruce Brown could be a valuable piece to whatever team is interested sort of bringing him in. So Bruce Brown is a valuable guy that, a team would trade for, like the Miami Heat, bring him in on their roster and still be effective on winning, but also not hurting their long-term cap. And then you also have a guy like Chris Boucher, who has been a monster this season. 11 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, and shooting 36% from the 3-point line now, and 38% behind the corners. Like, he has been very, very effective on the offense and defensive ends of the court. He's been confident, and he's been doing this in a pretty tumultuous situation in regards to consistent minutes, in regards to, opportunities being, laid out for him for this Raptors squad, and obviously being a young team. Of course, a guy like Chris Boucher, who wouldn't be considered specifically a playmaker, doesn't have a lot of guys, especially with Immanuel Quickley, Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett dealing with so many injuries, hasn't really been set up for success over the course of this year, and still, despite that, has had an amazing season, proving he can be valuable to a winning team, and again, not affect long-term cap. So Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, of course, are interesting pieces to whatever teams want to get interest in one of these trades, but, I don't have Kelly Olynyk's stats. I thought I did. I'll bring that back here, but so the Raptors have their piece to kind of insert themselves, make these moves happen, but what types of things will the Toronto Raptors want to get back? Well, Doug Smith essentially illustrates that as well, saying that, make no mistake, the Raptors don't want to take much long-term money back in a trade, but if they had to maybe take one amount on for next season and adding draft capital, they most assuredly will. It's the process they are pursuing right now, and it's likely the only way that the players on the market will be dealt ahead of this year's trade deadline. So the Raptors are willing to bring back like short-term, multi-year contracts, but of course not these just albatross deals that are going to handcuff Masai Ujiri for many seasons to come. A guy that's on a 2-year deal where the Heat might want some cap space in this offseason to immediately rebuild, to immediately build back up their stockpile of assets, right? It would make sense for them to sort of get off some multi-year guys, or they're trading to the Suns, to the Milwaukee Bucks, to these teams that have been linked. Masai Ujiri can come in and say, hey, we'll take on these multi-year deals, so you don't have to deal with luxury tax, you don't have to deal with, guys maneuvering around the cap for next season, but we get some extra draft capital. So that's what the plan is. And of course, draft capital, it is important now at this point in the NBA. So we could maybe get some more draft capital than we'd even expect, from an initial Bruce Brown or Chris Boucher trade. So very, very intrigued about the Toronto Raptors getting in on this blockbuster trade. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about one of these moves actually going down. Do you want to see the Raptors, facilitate one of these big moves in order to acquire some draft pieces, some young players, or anything along those lines? Let me know in the comment section down below. Anyways, you guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.